You know what's coming.
Your daily deep dive into everything Utah Jazz.
It's time.
All season long and even in the off season. It's Jazz Daily with JJ and Alex on your exclusive home of Utah Jazz basketball. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It is JJ and Alex, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Happy Friday to you. Our program is brought to you by the great G2G Bar. And, of course, it is a Friday. And, of course, we are at the Doug Smith Mitsubishi, which, of course, brings you the cut this hour. And the Doug Smith brand of vehicles, of course, all across the board. Chevy, Dodge, Ram, Subaru, Kia, of course, and now the Mitsubishi's here in American Fork. Nobody does cars like Doug, and we're at the Mitsubishi here in American Fork, like I said, so come down and hang out. Chris said, by the way, did you notice that so Chris divulged to us that he's in a grumpy mood. It's like the nicest grumpy guy I've ever met. You know
I know,
what I mean?
right? I'd hate to see him happy.
I'm in a little bit of a tough mood right now. I'm like, he's the nicest guy ever. So come down and hang out with Chris and his guys and get one of these awesome cars. Let's kick off the cut, though, this hour. Let's jump right in. Eric Spyropoulos, who's, of course, writing for the Utah Jazz and NBA.com, joining us again for another week. And, Eric, thanks for being with us, man.
Thanks for having me, yeah.
Tell me about this Jazz team right now, like how you look at it, because I have come around, man. Like, I've bought into all of the things that are going on with the development of this team. But dropping 14 in a row on the road is tough, and you know that Grizzlies team was very good. But we've seen a pattern of this team playing really, really tight games and still losing. But that's the part, I think, where you have the balance of good development minutes from these young guys in close games. And even if you lose, you still feel like you win. Is that about right? Like, I mean, how do you look at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it a very similar way. There were obviously there were no wins on the road trip, but like you said, there were a lot of close competitive games. I mean, they almost came back from, I think, 20 down against the Celtics on the road. They almost did another comeback on the road against a really good Grizzlies team. And I think the most important thing about those comebacks is, like you mentioned, the young guys are getting some of those minutes. You know, Cody Williams is closing the other night. Kyle Filipowski had a couple of huge games on the road trip. Obviously, Isaiah Collier has been, kind of doing his thing for the past 2 months or so as the starting point guard. But I think it's been a good sign of development for the young guys. And then even as some of the vets have kind of returned from injuries and sprinkled back into the lineup, I think you're seeing a nice balance between, a guy like Colin Sexton coming back and playing and setting the table and, letting those young guys kind of flourish around him. So hasn't translated to wins, but I think, like you said, if you're looking specifically at the player development over the course of the season, I think you're seeing a steady uptick, especially for the rookies since the turn of the new year.
Just the last couple of weeks, I'm looking at, some of these guys that have gotten a lot of time, and I look at what Kyle Filipowski's been able to do with some of those minutes. Obviously, Lowry being out or Walker being out, they've had to lean on him a little bit more. But what stands out to you about what Kyle Filipowski has been able to do with the extra minutes that he's been able to receive because of guys that have been out?
The biggest thing that stands out is the three-point shooting, and he's been pretty open about how he adjusted his jump shot during the season, which is pretty rare. You don't usually see players make an adjustment to their jump shot during a season, but he and Will Hardy had a conversation earlier in the year about a slight change they could make to his jump shot to kind of speed it up a little bit. And I mean, the results are really what's allowing him to kind of expand his game and have more of an impact. I mean, since the All-Star break, 47% from three. Obviously, he's not going to shoot that well over the course of an entire season, but what it does is not only does it allow him to provide some floor spacing for the Jazz offense, but it forces his man, especially if he's playing at the center spot, to come out and guard in the perimeter. So you're removing that opposing big man from protecting the rim. And then obviously earlier in the year, even when his jump shot wasn't falling, Filipowski was still able to kind of play make and set up his teammates. And so him hitting the three only allows him to do that even more. So the three-point shot has really been a huge weapon for him as of late, and it's opened up, not only more stuff for his own game, but because of that, it's opened up a lot of things for his teammates as well. And I think if that can continue, you're seeing a guy who can be really productive, especially at that center spot on the offensive end of the floor.
It's hard to get attention, obviously, from the rest of the league when when you're winning 15 games to losing over 50, and everybody looks and goes, okay, here's the standings. All right, the Jazz are firmly in that 14% to try to get that that number one overall pick in the draft. But what do you think across the league the vibe is on the type of job that Will Hardy's doing? It's a difficult one, but what do other people think about what this guy's potential is? I mean, obviously he came in very young, but what are the thoughts on Will Hardy as a head coach in this league?
I mean, I think there's a lot of praise for Will around the league. I think you can see it, in different ways too. I mean, you mentioned how competitive the Jazz have been as of late. I mean, this is a time of year where a lot of teams, especially younger teams that are at the bottom of the standings, they can kind of get into kind of a mental fatigue, and you see a lot of more mental lapses. And I think, there obviously are a few exceptions here or there within games, but the Jazz have still been able to remain competitive, nearly pull off some comebacks. And again, it goes back to the player development too. Everyone knew coming into the season that was going to be the focus. And, like we just talked about, the signs are really trending really well in terms of that area of developing those young guys. And it's not easy when there's, I think 8 players or 9 players age 23 or under on the roster. It's not easy to get them all to buy into their roles, to execute, things of that nature. And so I think you're seeing Will do a really good job of getting people to buy in, helping with the player development aspect of it, and helping this team remain competitive even during a stretch where, this is where teams can kind of go off the rails for a young team as they kind of look forward to the offseason. I don't think you're seeing that with this Jazz squad.
A year ago at this time, Walker Kessler was wrapping up what was a pretty disappointing sophomore season in the NBA, and a lot of us were wondering, man, what's his long-term future in this league? Where does he go from here? Why did things go wrong in his second year? What changed? What happened? He has responded so well in year 3 to the point now where we're saying this guy is top 15, maybe top 10 in the league when it comes to centers and all-around play. I'm looking at his last 10 games, and he's got 14 points, 14 rebounds, 3 blocks per game while shooting 75% from the field, and that includes some assists as well. What has Walker Kessler done this season to change perspective around the league about who he is as a player, and just how much has he improved this season, and what does it mean for his future?
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps the story of the season for the Jazz is Walker Kessler's kind of resurgence in a way from that sophomore season. He talked about early in the year how he met with a mental strength coach, and not only did he add weight and strength to his body to help him on the floor, but he's also tackled that kind of mental health component off the floor to kind of reshift his perspective about just, being an NBA player and the opportunity he has on a nightly basis, and not dwelling too much on mistakes that he makes, within a game or within a season. And I think all that's combining for obviously a career year for him, protecting the rim. The Jazz are having him, even do some switching on the defensive end just to open up the possibilities for him down the road, which I think is a great idea. The rebounding has been incredible. He's the best offensive rebounder in the league. The shot blocking obviously continues to be elite. And then you mentioned that interesting thing about his passing. He's getting the ball in his hands a little bit more, and he's making some plays with it, which I don't think many people expected from him coming into the season. And when you're in a season like this focused on player development, that's what you should be doing. You should be giving your players additional opportunities to see what they can do, to work on their skills, to just put them in a little bit more uncomfortable situations and see what happens. And I think pretty much across the board, Walker Kessler has passed with flying colors. And so I think, a year ago, people are kind of questioning what his future is, and now I think you're questioning how high he can get up in terms of the center ranks across the league, and you're looking at the Jazz having a foundational piece at a crucial position.
One of the things that, Eric, that we were laughing about this week, obviously, it happened, I think, when we were on the air, the news dropped that the Jazz had been fined for how they had been representing, it must have been Lowry. I think it was specifically for Lowry and how the injury report and all those things. What's the balance there? What gets you fined versus what's the game that all these teams are trying to play when it comes to making sure guys are getting the needed rest if they are still trying to nurse an injury versus just straight up keeping guys out of games, even these superstars that they want to keep playing in the league.
Yeah, I think the important thing about the player participation policy that was, the league deemed to be violated was that it specifically relates to what the league considers a star player, which is anyone who's been an all-star in the previous 3 seasons before that one. And so Lowry falls into that category by being an all-star a few years ago. There's a couple other guys on these kind of, young rebuilding teams like a Scotty Barnes on Toronto who also would count for that policy. It's an interesting thing. I think the league is trying to, obviously there's been an emphasis on, removing this, tanking by, flattening the lottery odds and such, and this player participation policy. But it is a delicate balance, like you said, because, Lowry did have, back injuries basically starting from the first week of the season. And I think for that first month or so, he missed about a week early in the year with the back. And I think throughout the season, I think you've seen moments where it seems like that back maybe never fully healed or has been, a little bit limiting in terms of his ability to kind of be really physical on the inside. So it's a balance because obviously you don't want to, put any of your vets out there in a position where they might, be vulnerable to an injury that could take them out for next season when the Jazz continue to kind of want to hope to be on the upswing. So I think, this one comes down, and I think Lowry spoke to the media at shoot-around today, and he basically talked about how the rest of the year it's going to be a really careful consideration based on how his back is feeling and then how the schedule comes out with like back-to-backs and such to see when he's going to be back on the floor.
Well, tonight the Utah Jazz host the Toronto Raptors, 7:30 p.m. tip-off. It's one of these weird situations, again, where both teams don't have as much incentive to win as they do to lose. It's weird, it's strange, and I think it's tough for fans. But what can fans expect if they come to the game tonight? What are they going to see? Who's going to be on the floor between the Jazz and the Raptors? Yeah,
and the Jazz, for the most part, John Collins injured his ankle the other night. He's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks, so he'll be out. And Keontae George is also still out with the foot injury. But besides that, the Jazz are going to be pretty healthy. And I think that gives a lot of intrigue in terms of, seeing a few of these lineup combinations that fans haven't really gotten to see that much this year with, like, Kyle playing next to Lowry. I think Lowry, Kyle, and Walker playing together would be a really interesting lineup combination to give you a lot of size and attack the glass. And then obviously you want to continue to see that Isaiah Collier, Colin Sexton, how they mesh in the backcourt. And, Toronto's going to be a little bit banged up. They got a couple guys questionable. They've been actually one of the hotter teams in the league because they've been playing a few other teams that are kind of in that bottom of the standings mix. But last week Walker Kessler had one of, if not the best game of his career in Toronto with the 25 rebounds, 8 blocks. So I think there's a lot of intrigue in tonight's game from a Jazz perspective of, not necessarily the outcome, but like what you're going to see from the mix of some of these young guys and some of the vets in the lineup.
Eric Spyropoulos, you can see his byline there at the NBA.com Utah Jazz page. And we appreciate you coming on the program here. We're looking forward to another fun night with this team. And thanks for hanging out with us again. We'll chat with you later.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
There you go. Eric Spyropoulos, everybody. I think that, again, I think that I'm starting to buy in, JJ. It's hard to tell people to buy in, and then you yourself don't really feel like, what this team's doing or
Once you accept the reality of it and you watch it with a different lens, you can enjoy it.
I think if you had a head coach who was fake or, was a difficult personality and was hard with the media and the thing is Will Hardy's such a straight shooter. Like, I feel like this is the way he's going to act when they're winning too.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't see.
That's his assignment during this point in time is to maintain that kind of a consistency and trying to maintain that culture that they talk about. It's a really tough ask to tell a coach, hey, we want to maintain a winning culture and a really healthy culture that's built on the principles that you learned under Coach Pop, but we're going to lose 50 games.
Right.
60 games.
And he's young, and
that's
so
a lot to ask.
He's young. He could get impatient very, very quickly.
Sure.
Like all those things. And I think that he has. He's in his third year. That's a lot. That's a lot of basketball games that he's already coached at the head coach level in the NBA.
I hate to say this, but this is not the last year of this. There's probably going to be another year,
at least.
Right.
Maybe a couple more.
This is a lengthy rebuild.
In terms of losing seasons, couple, maybe 2 or 3 left.
Look at the Spurs. They got Victor Wembanyama. They won the lottery. They got a generational player. They're going to miss the playoffs again
and they
for the second year after winning that lottery.
And the year after they win the lottery and they get him, and then it's the most generational player that we've seen in a long time in a draft, and they win 20 games.
Right.
And you go, okay, this takes a lot more of a development, and obviously it's going to take a minute. So
a lot of patience.
Jazz Raptors tonight, right after we wrap up. You're going to get a 6:30 pregame and a 7:30 tip-off at Delta Center. So there you go.